Hiya folks, it's Coach Kelvin here from the We Run Virtual Run Club and We Run Coach for Leeds and surrounding areas as well as online coaching. In this video, we're going to look at something in a slightly different way, and that is when load outweighs our capacity to deal with it to a certain degree. So in other words, we've overloaded a little bit, and some people might think of this as kind of like overtraining. Where maybe they've got like a little kind of niggle or injury, or maybe this is just manifesting itself in fatigue. We're just kind of feeling like super tired. The legs maybe feel a little bit flat, and it's one of those times where we need to take a download week or even like a couple of weeks of easier training. Or even maybe a short time off running and then build up some strength if it's something like an injury. But it's actually quite rare that we have to take time completely off running with injuries unless we do something acute that's just a little bit of a bigger thing, like a big twisted ankle or something like that. And quite often when this happens, the load outweighing capacity to deal with it, runners quite often get down. They think, oh no, I had to ease my training right back for like 2 weeks. I'm going to lose loads of fitness, or maybe I had to take a week completely off running and do some walking instead. I'm going to lose lots and lots of fitness. I can completely understand why people think like that. But here's just a different way of looking at it. What we're doing is we're experimenting there, and we're finding where our kind of ceiling is for our capacity, and that ceiling does change a little bit as well. It kind of hovers around. Sometimes it's a bit lower, sometimes it's a bit higher, depending on the sort of training load that's preceded what we're doing at the time, and also how our rest and recovery is going at the time. If rest and recovery is not going too well, but we're really fit, it's going to bring that ceiling down a little bit, and we're likely to bump into it a little bit sooner. So if we bump into that ceiling and we find that, let's say someone's got a niggly Achilles, and they bump into that ceiling, and they know they've bumped into that ceiling because their Achilles has just flared up a little bit, not enough to stop them running, but just a little bit. Let's say that runner has to just ease things back for a couple of weeks just while that settles down, and their fitness decreases a little bit. Now, we know that fitness really isn't going to decrease in 2 weeks, but it will affect our fitness long term by taking 2 weeks off training. That runner might get quite down about that. But let's think of it this way. What about the runner that never explores this ceiling here and is always very, very conservative with the training? They never seem to get injured. They always seem to be full of energy. But that runner might not be applying enough training load to drive fitness, which is fine if it's the runner's goal. So let's say that runner's goal is just not to get injured. I want to enjoy short, easy runs and not get injured. We would keep that runner's training load really, really low. But if a runner has like a race goal or a time or something like that, it's really wise at some point to explore that ceiling and see where it is, because if we don't know where that ceiling is, how do we know how much training load to apply to drive fitness gains? In other words, it's a really useful thing. And that person that's hit the ceiling and had to take a couple of weeks off, in the long term lost a tiny little bit of fitness because of that, and then sort of goes again. They know a lot of things. They know where that ceiling is. They know what happens when they hit that ceiling, so they know that if it's maybe something like an Achilles, maybe they ease training back a bit, maybe add a loading protocol around that Achilles to build some more strength around that area so that it raises that ceiling, and in future they can handle more training load. But also that runner's driven loads and loads of fitness to actually hit that ceiling, and then having to take a couple of weeks off and only dropping down a little bit and then being able to go again, but with more knowledge of where that ceiling is, in the long term, it's likely that they will end up getting much, much fitter than somewhere that just kind of hovers in between and is always really conservative with the training. So it depends on the individual and it depends on their goals. But for a runner that has quite lofty goals, it's definitely wise every now and then to explore where that ceiling is. So here are a few ideas, if you would like to explore that ceiling. So I'm going to use myself as an example. That my training over the last 3 months, some people might describe it as brave or crazy or whatever, because I've actually been experimenting with finding that ceiling. I've been racing purposefully a bit too hard, taking recoveries that are a bit too short. Being mindful when I get near that ceiling, that I ease things back a little bit. I had to take almost 2 weeks off at one point, just because my leg just felt a bit flat. It wasn't an injury, just neurologically they were a little bit flat. I didn't give myself enough time to recover after a race. But what I did before this experiment is I made sure that I was in a reasonably good position, so reasonably strong aerobically, and just kind of that musculoskeletal system as well. I was fairly robust before I threw myself at some training that I knew was going to overload me. And now I'm in a position where I've actually stepped back from that. I've given myself a little bit of time to recover. I've done a training week this week that reflects where I now think I am. And after my recovery run this morning, sort of listening to my body, I'm really happy with how this week's gone. And I can now use this week as a gauge, as a starting point. But one of the challenges doing that is that things like niggles and injuries, you don't just kind of overload in one single run. It's an accumulation of training, probably over kind of the last 4 to 6 weeks, and maybe even a little bit longer than that. So definitely either an amount of experience is required when we're experimenting finding the ceiling, or maybe guidance from a coach. But I've now got lots and lots of knowledge. It's been a lot of fun. I've experimented with lots of different things. And by doing that, I now know what my capacity to deal with a certain amount of load is. So now I know I'm going to work on kind of maybe 3 build weeks and maybe an easier week moving forwards. And I know what to add into those weeks. I know what an easy week should feel like on a build week 1. I know that build week 2 should probably feel somewhere like this week that I've had. Build week 3 might feel a slightly bit tougher, and then I'll take out the intensity on that download week to make sure that I'm recovering well. But I've got quite a big goal at the moment. I've got 2 goals actually. One kind of like outweighs the other a little bit. My main goal is always to be fit enough to be able to do back-to-back days in the Alps, because I'm working towards being able to guide running trips out in the Alps. So that is my kind of overarching goal almost. And then I suppose my secondary goal is next year, hopefully I'll get into CCC, which is a 100k race with 6,500 meters of elevation. I did the race in 2017 and had a really bad race when I didn't know as much about training and my body as I do now. And I'm going to move towards these things, but now I've got a starting point. And it might seem a bit crazy, but it's probably taken me about 6 months of experimentation to find this starting point, to set myself up initially to be kind of strong enough to be able to, almost fit enough and strong enough to be able to get myself into trouble. Then experimented with a sort of 3-month training block where I knew it was a little bit more than my body could handle. But now I know what my body can handle and what individual sessions it can handle. I can use that information to program my training in the future. So a little bit of I hope that wasn't too confusing, but one of the sort of kind of main messages that run through that is that if you're the sort of runner that occasionally hits that ceiling and has to ease back a bit, don't get frustrated that you've had to ease back. You're probably going to progress, unless you're just trying to sort of go like that at the ceiling. You're probably going to progress quicker than a runner that just sort of hovers in the middle and is always super conservative and almost kind of like almost scared to get injured. So I do hope that makes some sort of sense. And please, if you have any questions or comments, just pop them down below. And for now, happy running.